Welcome back guys to the new Godmode 2.0 build, which uses completely new mechanics, completely new engravings. We don't even need any of these elusive items like the Spartan Javelin or the Oxesia's Helm to be completely invincible. We use a much simpler build that you can really make without all these items. You don't have to wait for 42 weeks for Oxesia to return. You can just simply make this build out of the items you get from blacksmith or looting. You can also use 2 of the same weapons now in your build, increasing the damage up to 2 times of the amount from the original Godmode build. We can deal up to 14 million damage in the Demigod version and still up to 11 million damage in the full Godmode version. It always depends how much armor and how much resistance do you really need to feel like Godmode, and that is different for different people, and therefore I decided to make 2 builds. Every time you use these special items like the Spartan Javelin or the Oxesia's Helm of Darkness, you lose a ton of damage because you cannot use 2 weapons of the same type, you cannot use the best engravings on your helmet, and that was something I really wanted to fix. And I also wanted to show you a Godmode build that doesn't need any of these items. With the full Godmode variant, you can take over 10 hits from either melee, range and elemental attacks, even on Nightmare, even when you use the Fox of Olympus. You take so little damage that with a single hit you can refill all the damage you lost from that hit. That means you will still be at full health when you do your hit. And even when you got hit too much, you have plenty of time to use Second Wind to refill all your health. And also for those of you who don't like so many resistances, I made a Demigod version where you have the same melee and elemental resistance, but you take more damage from ranged hits. And the Demigod variant has 25% more damage than the other variant, so that is kind of a trade-off you should really consider. The Demigod variant will deal up to 900,000 damage with the light attack when you attack from behind. It will deal up to 1.3 million damage with the heavy attack and over 4 million damage with the charged heavy attack, easily even on daytime. The Ring of Chaos will be up to 2.2 million damage, the Fury of the Bloodline in an animation cancel will be 7.5 million and the Overpower up to 14 million damage. The archery stuff isn't bad either, with over 5 million damage for the devastating shot and over 6.5 million damage with the even stronger predator shot. Rush assassination would be a bit of a gamble, so I recommend you to use the critical assassination if you want to assassinate mercenaries on Nightmare. The full Godmode, including all the range resistance, will have 25% less damage with around 700,000 for the light attack. It will have around 1.1 million damage for the heavy attack and up to 3.2 million damage for the charged heavy attack. Ring of Chaos will be up to 1.4 million damage, Fury of the Bloodline up to 5 million damage and the Overpower up to 11 million damage. The archery stuff is also a bit weaker, around 25%, here we have 4 million damage with the devastating shot and we have 4.5 million damage with the predator shot. However, the changes in the build doesn't really affect our assassin damage. It is still possible to do a rush assassination occasionally, but critical assassination would be the safe bet, of course. Both builds also have around 4.8 million damage for the RS Madness activation and around 800,000 for the attacks. And if you also want personal build advice, incredible 4K wallpapers, private member chats on our Discord server, make sure to check out the membership perks via Patreon or YouTube. When we check out the inventory values here, we have 136,000 warrior damage, 320,000 assassin damage, pretty awesome values considering all the tankiness we have in this build. Of course you get the damage per engraving calculation here for this build, and you can also find all the calculations in the description of this video. We will first off start with the Demigod variant here that uses the Hater's Harper or any other perfect sword you can find. It has warrior damage, critical damage and damage swords. As you know, I really like to have the permanent fire damage engraving on my sword. It doesn't give me more damage than when I would activate it manually, but it is more convenient. I only have to activate one ability, Ring of Chaos, and not fire and Ring of Chaos at the same time. And also for all the other abilities, I have fire automatically and I don't have to activate it also. Of course, you can also activate it manually and use armor penetration here instead. For the second sword, you can actually use the copycat sword from the really bad day questline in Locris, but I will also show you a replacement so that you don't need that unique sword here. It has warrior damage, damage on Spartan soldiers, which is bad, and critical chance. We mainly use this sword because we need the 10% crit chance. But you can simply also use another perfect warrior sword with warrior damage, damages swords, 50% crit damage, and then engrave the Talon Dagger engraving. The 10% crit chance but minus 50% crit damage. The 50% critical damage will cancel out on that sword, making it as good, if not even better, than the copycat sword. The only downside is that we cannot use another legendary engraving, so when you want to play with the Farx with the 100% damage, then you have to place 100% damage on your left sword when you use that. For our bow, of course, we use the Bighorn Bow. The Bighorn Bow again is a glitched item. It amplifies your warrior damage by a factor of 1.6. Of course, it needs to be upgraded because it uses the DPS, the 6495, and adds it to your left melee weapon. This trick only works with this bow. Even if you have a bow with the same stats, it won't work. You have to get the Bighorn Bow, but you can use your 203 Helix credits to get it. Now it really starts to get interesting. Here on the helmet we have warrior damage, 20% critical chance while full health, 30% damage swords, and here we use 40% chance to ignore half damage. And that is the whole trick in this build. We can use 100% chance to ignore half damage in this build to replace several other resistance engravings. In fact, you can save up to 3 to 4 resistance engravings and simply use 2 times the 40% chance and then the 20% chance from the masteries to get to 100%. That is equal to 50% resistance to any of the 3 damage types. You would need much more resistance engravings to achieve the same. In fact, you save up to 3 to 4 resistance engravings and replace it with the 2 times 40% chance to ignore half damage. That is much more efficient and saves you valuable engraving slots. We also don't have to go for 100% resistance in every class because half damage will take care of the rest of the damage we take. On the bracers you should go for warrior damage, 100% critical damage while full health, 10% crit chance and 30% melee resistance. On the belt we then use warrior damage, 30% melee resistance, 100% critical damage while full health and another 40% chance to ignore half damage. As usual for these kind of tank builds we have a torso with warrior damage, critical damage, 20% elemental resistance, and then we use the 15% resistance to all types. And on the boots we have another warrior damage, 20% crit chance, 100% crit damage and another elemental resistance. That will give us a total stats of 328% warrior damage, we have 90% damage swords, 100% crit chance, 575% critical damage. That is really high compared to any other tank build because we also have 90% melee resistance, 37% range resistance and 70% elemental resistance. And when we also add the 100% chance to ignore half damage, we will in fact have 95% melee resistance, 68% range resistance and 85% elemental resistance. If that is not enough resistance, you can make the complete full God mode here with 115,000 warrior damage, 320,000 assassin damage. Then you have to use a perfect warrior sword with warrior damage, damages swords, 50% critical damage, and you have to engrave the 10% crit chance but minus 50% critical damage from the Talon Dagger. On the right sword you have to use the copycat sword if you want to go with 100% crit chance, otherwise you could also go for another perfect warrior sword and engrave it with 100% critical damage. That will also bring you back to the original 136,000 warrior damage, but you will only be at 90%. So if you have a copycat sword, I recommend you to use the copycat sword. The Bighorn Bow is unchanged, it has 10% crit chance engraved. Then on the helmet we use warrior damage, 30% range resistance, 40% chance to ignore half damage and 20% crit chance while full health. The arms have warrior damage, range resistance, 100% crit damage and 30% melee resistance. The belt has the same warrior damage, 30% melee resistance, 100% critical damage and 40% chance to ignore half damage. The torso is unchanged and the boots are also unchanged to the previous build. In the full God mode you have the same 328% warrior damage but only 60% damage swords, 100% critical chance but only 525% critical damage. In exchange of all the damage you have now 90% melee resistance, 91% range resistance and 70% elemental resistance. And when we add the half damage to that, we have in fact 95, 96 and 85% resistance. That will be a real God mode then, because any hit you take will be compensated by the health refill from any hit you make. So you will literally stay at full health every time if you don't mess up. For this build to make it work really well, you need around 200 points or better 240 points. As usual, I would suggest you go with 6th Sense. That slows down time not even for Hunter but also for Warrior and Assassin. 2 points on Arrow Master will unlock either fire or poison arrows, then you should go for a multi-shot. Multi-shot is very cool when you combine it with the Chronos Time Shift, the enhanced ability here on the Assassin tree. You can simply jump up in the air, levitate around and then hit your enemies from above with a multi-shot, eliminating all the shields they have in their hands. That is also what I used at the beginning in the ship battles. Then of course go for the Devastating Shot 400%, Predator Shot 600% and also the Archery Master for the refill of your first Adrenaline segment. For the warrior abilities, I really recommend you go with Charged Heavy Attack that deals 300% damage with a charged attack with your sword, so especially good for swords. Weapons Master gives you 10% crit chance, 40% damage. Then of course mandatory the Gear Master, all the passive abilities. I recommend you go for 3 points here on flaming attacks, because when you want to use the God mode without the permanent fire damage engraving, then you have to activate fire damage manually. Putting 3 points here eliminates the cooldown. Then of course grab the 40% fire damage from Fire Mastery, go for the overpower attacks for the most damage and also go for Ares Madness to use the big activation damage bonus. If you have the Legacy of the First Blade, you can also use Fury of the Bloodline, otherwise use Ring of Chaos and Second Wind for your health refill. In the Assassin tree, mandatory here, grab the 50% critical damage from Shadow Assassin and also the 40% additional assassin damage. Then you can go for a rush assassination, but it is not very consistent in this build. So only use it for normal enemies, and for the mercenaries rather use critical assassination. Then don't forget to add Stealth Master for the additional out of combat damage overnight. The other ability here is the Chronos Time Shift, the advanced ability from the Vanish ability. That makes you levitate in the air and you can still use your Hunter abilities like multi-shot when you are levitating in the air. That is really cool, especially when you use it in ship battles or versus Athenians, because they don't hold their shields up in the air. You can simply hit them directly in the head. In the masteries you should invest at least 12 points on the crit chance, 12 points on the critical damage and then also go for the 12 points on range resistance. When you invest another 8 points here on range resistance, you would only get 3% additional range resistance. So be careful when you spend your points, the last points are not so valuable than your first points. If you have over 200 points, you can spend 8 points here on warrior damage and also 8 points on health, 12 points on total armor, but that can also be skipped if you have below 200 or around 200. The only thing that is really important here in the warrior tab is the melee resistance and the damage dealt restored as health. Everything else can be skipped if you don't have enough points. Then here in the Assassin tab, go for as much points on damage with swords. That is your biggest damage driver, even better than critical damage. Of course, go for 15 points on critical chance while full health and also 15 points on critical damage while full health. That will give you a total of 98% critical chance with that amount of points. What you should go for is 20 points on chance to ignore half damage, because if you don't max it out, it can happen that you get a very big hit. That can be really dangerous, especially on Nightmare. When you use the Thugs of Olympus, you don't want to get a big hit. So make sure that you have 100% chance to apply half damage. And also don't forget to add the 12 points here on elemental resistance as well. When I could use all my points, I would max out critical chance, critical damage and also go for headshot damage, then max out range resistance and also a couple of points here on adrenaline on headshot kill. In the warrior tab, I would max out warrior damage, then don't really max out health and armor because that is not so much worth it, but I would totally go for the melee resistance, fire damage and armor penetration as well as the damage restored on health. In the Assassin tab, I usually go for damage whenever time is slowed down because together with 6th Sense that affects all our abilities. And then of course the usual stuff, assassin damage, damage with swords, the critical stuff, damage while full health, chance to ignore half damage is already full in the basic version, then max out elemental resistance, a couple of adrenaline, damage on leads and bosses, and all the other points you could spend on cooldown duration, or even if you want to improve your rush assassination, then of course you could also spend them on rush assassination if you want to. So I hope you like the new God build. I think that is a really appropriate replacement for the old God build in your settings. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like and see you next time. Maybe tomorrow.